Dennis Prager here. Thanks for listening to the Daily Dennis Prager Podcast. To hear the entire 3 hours of my radio show, commercial-free, every single day, become a member of Pragertopia. You'll also get access to 15 years' worth of archives, as well as the daily show prep. Subscribe at pragertopia.com. Hello, everyone, and a good Monday to you. I will be headed tonight to Phoenix, Arizona. Tomorrow I will be testifying in the Arizona Capitol on Arizona State University's professors who wrote an open letter to the head of Arizona State University. I wasn't the president, I was the dean, I believe. And it was with regard to my and Charlie Kirk's appearance at the university. They objected because they charged me with being a white nationalist. You understand that they're liars. It is the idea that I am a white nationalist. The most vile ideology in history was Nazism, which was white nationalism. A form of it was really white racism. But white nationalism will do. There is not a single word in the 1,000 columns, 10 books, 40 years of broadcasting that suggests that I am a white nationalist. All leftists lie because they do not believe in truth as a value. The liberals tell the truth and lie, conservatives tell the truth and lie, and leftists lie. That because truth is not a value. It's just as simple as that. It's why do many people not marry? Because marriage is not a value. That's all. It's not a complex issue. So this is not dying. One donor to Arizona State who gave, I think, $400,000 a year has stopped giving money to Arizona State, which is a very good thing. You shouldn't be giving to your alma mater. You're a fool if you do, unless your alma mater actually believes in teaching, which most schools do not, obviously. This is the world in which we live. The universities are awful, just awful. I compiled a list after I told you this a few weeks ago. There were actually, they say 37 or 39 professors. I counted 34. It doesn't matter, but I do believe in precision. So I looked up all of them, every single one of them. And they're a disgrace to the field of education, which has been disgraced. So I won't be here tomorrow because I will be testifying in Phoenix, which is a good thing. So is it, I guess the Republicans, they control the state assembly, is that it? Yeah, that's fascinating.
They have a Democratic governor.
I don't think they have a Democratic governor because Carrie Lake lost to that individual. Yes. This is the world in which we live, my dear friends. So how many of you are aware of the Bobby Kennedy controversy? You're aware of it?
Yeah.
Bobby Kennedy Jr.
We're talking about his anti-Semitic comments?
Yeah, his allegedly anti-Semitic comments, right. So later on in the show, I should have sent this to you, Sean. I'm going to send to you an interview between Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, who's been on this show many times, very prominent Orthodox rabbi, and Bobby Kennedy Jr. By the way, Rabbi Boteach does not agree with him at all on vaccines. He mentioned in his interview with Bobby Kennedy Jr. that he was vaccinated with all the boosters, had his children vaccinated, and all I can say is Rabbi Boteach and his children are lucky that they have not malaffected them. I disagree with the rabbi on that issue, on the COVID-19 vaccination, especially for young people. But I'm only mentioning that so you'll understand he is not an ideological kindred spirit with Bobby Kennedy Jr. But Rabbi Boteach, who is very vigilant with regard to Jew hatred, i.e. anti-Semitism, knows that what the comments that Bobby Kennedy Jr. made were not, in fact, anti-Semitic. What he said was, and I listened to it, he said that what he thought was off record at some meeting in Manhattan with people, and he said that from what he read, it appears that Chinese and Ashkenazi Jews are more immune to COVID-19 than Caucasians and who are the others? Than blacks, yeah, and Caucasians and blacks. Caucasians and blacks were less immune than Chinese and Ashkenazi Jews. Ashkenazi means European Jews as opposed to Jews from the Middle East, for example. I have no idea why that is considered anti-Semitic, but I understand, having written a book on anti-Semitism, why some Jews are frightened by such statements, because Jews were blamed throughout their history for whatever bad thing happened. Massive numbers of Jews were massacred, being blamed for the Black Plague, for example, in medieval Europe. And these memories don't die. So it sounds like an anti-Semite can use it. Oh, you see, it was engineered not to kill Jews. I have no idea if Jewish rates of sickness or serious sickness and death from COVID were any different from any other groups. I have no idea. I have no idea if what he said was accurate. All I can say is that I agree with Rabbi Boteach that Bobby Kennedy Jr. is not anti-Semitic, and to portray the comments as anti-Semitic is simply dishonest. But that's what they want to do because they want to portray him as evil in any possible way. The hatred, I would say that in order of hatred, Trump won, Bobby Kennedy Jr. too, on the part of the world of the left. To have the name Kennedy and to have these views, no, that's not tolerable. Well, I'll play for you some excerpts from that. Did you see this Telegraph article? A relationship with another human is overrated? Yeah. Inside the rise of AI girlfriends? Yeah. There are so many lonely men out there that apparently, I mean, even I always think I'm sort of unshockable, but millions of mostly men are carrying out relationships with a chatbot partner. Oh, what do you think of that? Miriam is offering to send me romantic selfies. You can ask me for one anytime you want, she says in a message that pops up on my phone screen. The proposal feels a little forward. Miriam and I had only begun swapping thoughts about pop music. However, the reason for her lack of inhibitions soon becomes apparent. When I try to click the blurred out image Miriam has sent, I am met with that familiar internet obstruction, the paywall. True love, it appears, will cost me $19.99 a month, although I can shell out $300 for a lifetime subscription. I decline. Miriam is not a real person. She is an AI that has existed for only a few minutes, created by an app called Replica, with a K. It informs me that our relationship is at a pathetic level 3. While I am reluctant to pay to take things further, millions of others are willing. Did you hear that? That's the part I said where I'm sort of shocked. Millions of men are in a romantic relationship with a chatbot. Yeah, well, we're doing real well, aren't we? With the rejection of traditional middle-class Judeo-Christian values. Doing real well. Gone from love and marriage go together like a horse and carriage to relationships with AI chatbots. Gold dealers are a dime a dozen. They're everywhere. What sets these companies apart, and whom can you really trust? This is Dennis Prager for AmFed Coin and Bullion, my choice for buying precious metals. When you buy precious metals, it's imperative that you buy from a trustworthy and transparent dealer that protects your best interests. So many companies use gimmicks to take advantage of inexperienced gold and silver buyers. Be cautious of brokers offering free gold and silver, or brokers that want to sell you overpriced collectible coins, claiming they appreciate more than gold and silver. What about hidden commissions and huge markups? Nick Grovich and his team at AmFed always have your back. I trust this man. That's why I mentioned him by name. Nick's been in this industry over 42 years, and he's proud of providing transparency and fair pricing to build trusted relationships. If you're interested in buying or selling, call Nick Grovich and his team at AmFed Coin and Bullion, 800-221-7694. AmericanFederal.com, AmericanFederal.com.
I'm down. I call on you, my friend. I call on you.
It's fascinating. So there's a Senate investigation which I will be attending tomorrow. ASU has more speakers for more points of view than any other organization in Arizona, said Arizona State President Michael Crow in response to the announcement of the Senate investigation. And we at ASU fight hard to maintain this very important role. So why doesn't he condemn the professors?
Yeah.
It's a phony comment. It drives me crazy when they lie. And he's not the worst, Crow. There are worse college presidents, which, of course, is saying nothing. It's like saying that, what's a good analogy? There are worse teams than the team that is third worst. Who's the worst team in baseball right now? Is there a worst? Are you following?
Probably Kansas City.
Kansas City?
Yeah.
Why?
Nothing's working for them.
Nothing's working for them? Do you have any Kansas City players on your... You do? Are they doing all right?
They're doing better than...
How are you doing in the baseball thing? Not well. How are you doing, Sean? You're doing better than Alan? I thought that was sort of a deal you guys had. You would not do better than Alan. It is usually the case. The Oakland A's are in competition. All right. ASU has more speakers for more points of view. Well, I'm going to raise this tomorrow at the Arizona Senate. If the president actually believes that, then why has he not condemned these people for lying? Do you understand how evil these professors are? To call me a white nationalist? I'm a Jew who has fought anti-Semitism my whole life. Right? If you consider Nazis right, I consider them racist, which is a separate. It's not a political position, but I don't blame the left. I don't blame the right. Right now, the left is the greater source of anti-Semitism, but that's beside the point. I fought this my whole life, and these scummy professors have the audacity to call me a white nationalist? Oh, God, I'll say these things tomorrow at the Arizona Senate. A hearing will be held on Tuesday featuring testimony from Atkinson herself. She is the woman who wrote the piece that went viral in the Wall Street Journal. God bless the Wall Street Journal for publishing that piece. That's what set this all in motion, as well as Prager, ASU religion and philosophy professor Owen Anderson, and talk show host Seth Leibson. I know Seth very well for many years. He's terrific. He's on Salem Radio in Phoenix. He's just a gem. And Owen Anderson, did we have Owen on the show? Was he the professor we had on? Yeah, he's terrific. He's a hero. Well, I'll tell you, this is going to be quite something. Wednesday, I'll have a report for you. The continuing adventures of Dennis Prager. I just spoke in Romania, and now I'm testifying in the Arizona Senate. I have to laugh because my only alternative is to cry. The low moral and intellectual state of the universities, it should stagger you. What is Harvard costing? Did you send me that piece? Harvard's with a room and board now at $90,000 a year. $90,000. People don't go there in any event for the education. They go there for the degree and the contacts, which I understand. But I mean, think of the most 99% of other universities where you don't have the prestige of a Harvard degree. I really wonder what is prestigious today. I guess Stanford is prestigious, right? Or MIT.
They're all prestigious.
No. You can't say they're all prestigious. I don't know if somebody says I went to Columbia for graduate school. I don't know how prestigious that is.
Yeah.
It is?
Sure, it's an Ivy League
What a
school.
joke. What a joke.
All the Ivy Leagues.
It's a bad joke if that's prestigious. So that's interesting. So if I say I did my graduate work in Russian and Soviet affairs, communism, at Columbia, or I did it at the University of Michigan, you think the first sounds better?
Well, University of Michigan's also.
Also, University of Michigan's also prestigious. Okay, so had I said I did my graduate work at the University of Montana, then you would say it's less prestigious.
Absolutely.
That's interesting. Why do they still have prestige? That's my question. This is a residue of the time when they were actually good universities. Like, see, the universities, my dear listener, note I use the singular because most of you are listening alone. My dear listener, the university is living on cut flower prestige. The analogy I used, which was not original to me, but I'm the one who publicized it, as it were, cut flower ethics. It was one of the phrases and ideas. Will Herberg is the man who brought it to my attention, but he even acknowledged he didn't make it up. So this is a long time ago. Cut flower ethics is a brilliant statement. This is what it means. Ethics are like flowers that are cut flowers. Flowers cut from their soil will live or look like they're living for any number of days, correct? However, they will die. Why will they die? Because they've been cut off from the soil that nurtured them. What is the soil that nurtured Western ethics? The Bible. That's the soil. That's been cut off, and now we have the decimation of Western society by a generation that has now 2 generations cut off from the biblical moral roots of the society, or if you will, Judeo-Christian. They're essentially the same. The universities have cut flower prestige. They once had reason to be prestigious, and they're living off those fumes. You know, when I read Wall Street Journal op-ed pieces, opinion pieces, and editorials, I always think, does any leftist read this? I read the New York Times daily. I check out virtually every major left-wing site. And my answer is no, they don't. So leftists live in a cocoon that is much, much more constricted than do people on the right. There are people on the right who live in a cocoon, but it's very hard to live in a cocoon on the right, even if you want to. You have to not send your children to school. You have to read only conservative or right-wing sources, and it's very, very hard. You basically can't go to the movies. Progressives are proclaiming that the smoky skies engulfing the eastern U.S. from Canadian wildfires are another sign that the climate apocalypse is nigh. By the way, folks, even bigger than this. Apparently, the world has not gotten any warmer in the last 15 years. Did you send me that one? This is mind-boggling. Let me see if I could find that immediately. If not, I'll read to you more about that and bring that to you later. Let's see. Well, I'll find it for you. Oh yeah, here it is. Here it is.
Check the date. Check the date.
I got it.
Check the date.
Check the date. It says July 17th, 2023.
Okay.
It's a very, very accurate thing you asked me to do. Sometimes we get fooled. So this is from the Daily Mail. Let me check the date again. You're right about that. I put in the wrong date. How do you like that? Congratulations to you. That is eerie.
That's why I didn't send it to you.
Yeah, that's why you didn't send it to me, because it's from years ago.
It's still true.
So, but it must, I assume it's still true. That's right. World's top climate scientists told to cover up the fact that the Earth's temperature hasn't risen for the last 15 years. That was in 2013. So it'd be very interesting to see in the last 10 years. I'd like to see an update on that. All right, so I can continue actually with this. So progressives are proclaiming that the smoky skies engulfing the eastern U.S. from Canadian wildfires are another sign that the climate apocalypse is nigh. Instead, they're a reminder that government policies to mitigate the impact of natural disasters matter more than those to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. Do you follow that? The issue is carbon dioxide emissions are not the primary reason for the Canadian wildfires. Lack of government policies or government policies are. Much of the East Coast has been under air quality alerts. Smoke was so thick last Wednesday that the Federal Aviation Administration halted flights at New York City's LaGuardia Airport. There were 415 active wildfires across Canada, with 238 burning out of control. No doubt, drought and a warm start to the summer have contributed. But the bigger culprit is poor forest management that has let fuel accumulate over decades. I live in California. That's the exact same thing. They won't burn brush. Do you know why? What is their thinking?
It's not natural.
It's not natural? You're kidding me. That's the reason? Well, it's not, toilets are not natural.
Lots of things.
I mean, not natural? That is about as unpersuasive an argument for anything as I can think of. Not natural? It is not. Okay. This hardly gets a mention in media reports, not from anti-fossil fuel politicians. Since the Paris Accords, this is New York City Controller Brad Lander. Since the Paris Accords, the four major U.S. banks have lent over $1 trillion for new fossil fuel supply projects. Tonight's a smoke signal that it's time for them to stop. Maybe the smoke clouded his judgment. We'll find out why in a moment. Just a few weeks ago, just when you thought it couldn't get any better, Mike Lindell with MyPillow is launching the MyPillow 2.0. When Mike invented My Pillow, it had everything you could ever want in a pillow. Now, nearly 20 years later, he discovered a new technology that makes it even better. The My Pillow 2.0 has the patented adjustable fill of the original My Pillow, and now with a brand new fabric that is made with a temperature-regulating thread. The My Pillow 2.0 is the softest, smoothest, and coolest pillow you'll ever own. For my listeners, the My Pillow 2.0 is buy one, get one free offer with promo code Prager. My Pillow 2.0 temperature regulating technology is 100% made in the USA and comes with a 10-year warranty and a 60-day money-back guarantee. Just go to mypillow.com and click on the radio listeners square to the buy one, get one free offer. Enter promo code Prager or call 800-761-6302 to get your My Pillow 2.0 now. Hi, everybody. Dennis Prager here. According to my producer, if Time Magazine actually awarded Man of the Year properly, my guest would receive the Man of the Year title. However, a world in which Time would give this man the title of Man of the Year would necessitate a multiverse. Yeah, there would have to be another universe for that to happen. However, as far as the Prager Show is concerned, he is a Man of the Year, or the Man of the Year even. And that's Christopher Rufo, who has blown the whistle on so many things, including Disney. And finally, he has the book out, America's Cultural Revolution, How the Radical Left Conquered Everything. So here's the story on this, my dear listeners. I have said all of my broadcast career, whatever the left touches, it destroys. Well, I began with whatever it touches, it ruins. I've upped it to destroys. If you want the proof, here's the book. I gave you the principle, here's the evidence. America's Cultural Revolution. It's a play on words because Mao had a cultural revolution, which I studied in great depth. That is what the left does. It destroys the past, destroys the present, and it's called the Cultural Revolution. The book is up at DennisPrager.com. Christopher Rufo, welcome back to my show.
It's great to be with you.
Yeah, it probably is. We're kindred spirits. So, you live in the state of Washington, was established by us, and reminded me that you do. So I'm curious, there may not be an answer, truly may not be. It may be a tie for first. Is Seattle the epicenter of the Cultural Revolution, or is it a tie among many cities?
It's really interesting. I think it's really a two-part process. There's the theoretical side, and that is driven by intellectuals, activists, journalists that are really scattered across the country, but united as a class, one might say, through their shared commitment to ideas. That's dispersed and decentralized. But in practice, the epicenter of America's ongoing cultural revolution is in the Pacific Northwest, in cities, including most notably Seattle and Portland, Oregon. And so what I've had the unique insight into is seeing how these ideas play out in practice. You know, Portland was embedding critical race theory in its K-12 schools 10 years ago. Seattle declared that ethnomathematics was the future of math education, and math was a racial construct, 5 years ago. And so, and then, of course, during the riots of 2020, they established the autonomous zone in Seattle and the 100-night siege in Portland. So I've had a window really into the future of the American left by just observing the present in my local environment.
Do you have an explanation? Why Seattle and Portland?
Seattle and Portland have a long history of radicalism, and this is dating back 100 years to the IWW, the Wobblies, the Marxist labor movement at the time, had a number of different organizations that were vying for power. I think it's because perhaps it is the last frontier of the United States, and it's been very left-wing, it's been very progressive in a kind of libertarian mold in its own way. And then I think in its modern iteration, it's been kind of insulated from any kind of realism. Portland and Seattle are the whitest big cities in America, the most left-leaning big cities in America, the most atheist or non-believing cities in America. And so all of those traditional restraints, even the restraints of mixed demographics, have insulated the population here. So they can follow the utopian strand of left-wing radicalism to its practical conclusions in a way that other cities, I think, have more historical, ideological, and demographic controls. And even a big left-wing city like New York, there's still an ethnic populations in New York that really constrain the city to a certain degree, which is why I think you have something quite different taking root in the West Coast.
That's an excellent answer. And what intrigued me was the whiteness of Portland and Seattle. So really, if you want to know the depth of leftist ideology, maybe one would not look in any minority community. Is that fair?
That's absolutely fair, and that's really the narrative that I outlined in the book. It's a really interesting alliance that has been the central left-wing coalition dating back now more than a half century. You have the left-wing, highly educated intelligentsia, people that are leading the ideological revolution, making this alliance with predominantly lower-income, urban, African-American communities that were rioting in the 1960s, that also rioted in 2020. And it's really this two-part coalition that borrows from the supposed moral authority on racial grounds of lower-income Black communities, but also seeks to create this pincher movement from ideology that's influencing your culture, influencing your curriculum, influencing your HR, that comes from predominantly left-wing and white radicals, with that street-based threat of violence that we saw everywhere in 2020 with the BLM movement. And so that's been this interesting alliance between, in some ways you can think of it as the mind and the body, this dualism, almost a Cartesian dualism. They operate on both axes to create intellectual and then also physical pressure through the threat of violence.
So I'm looking at a piece in the Wall Street Journal from 2 weeks ago. Portland is losing its residents. Big piece. So how do people, and I really don't know the answer to this, except that you could say it's a secular religion and people who have religion rarely challenge their beliefs. But other than that, why do people keep voting for the decimation of their city, be it San Francisco, Chicago, Seattle, Portland? How do they rationalize this to themselves?
It's a great question, and I do a deep dive in the book on Portland and its public school system, and Seattle and the violent riots of 2020, and then I explain the answer to that question in this way. You have this interesting split. In a city like Seattle, 70% more or less of the people want to have tougher policies on homelessness. They want to have tougher policies on open-air drug markets and shoplifting. They support the police. They want to have a return to law and order. On all of these issues, the public is, in a majority, sometimes a significant majority, opposed to the left-wing factions that control the policymaking institutions, the city council, sometimes the mayor's office, although that's shifted recently. And the question is why? Why does the public opinion not translate into public policy? And the answer is because public opinion without institutions that can marshal it into a political consensus and a political power means almost nothing. Because in the city like Seattle, all of the institutions that shape knowledge, opinion, and policy are dominated by the left. You have left-wing billionaires that give money to all the NGOs. You have left-wing bureaucrats within the permanent city government that push left-wing orthodoxy from the inside. And you have left-wing media that's subsidized by those same billionaires that only pushes one opinion, and any deviation will earn you scorn, will earn you, the ridicule of the established opinion. And then finally, you have something that I confronted when I was living in Seattle. If all of that fails, if you can't be shamed by the media, you can't be, shoved aside by the billionaire benefactors, if you're threatening the consensus within the city government, Then they unleash the foot soldiers. These are very unsavory people, often very disturbed people. They'll show up at your house. They'll put posters with your name on it. They'll rally the mob to try to intimidate you physically, to go after your family. And then when the time is right, they'll actually riot. They'll actually commit violence. They'll actually start looting buildings. And so this institutional architecture has enough power that it can defy public opinion. And unfortunately, a place like Seattle, San Francisco, LA, until the institutional power balances out, the public opinion won't matter to a great degree.
But why? All right, so that was unfortunately excellent. Why does that matter when you're alone in the ballot box?
Because your perceptions are already, in some ways, preformed. If you don't have the language, you don't have the media narratives and the reporting and the evidence, you don't have the people that are hitting the streets, that are tabling, that are talking to you, and you don't have the NGOs and the nonprofit centers and the research institutions that are building the case, building the consensus, and mobilizing public opinion, most people are relatively apathetic.
All right, we'll continue that in a moment.
Basic.
Christopher, I want to push your book, America's Cultural Revolution, up at DennisPrager.com. Nobody breaks more news about the left than Christopher Rufo. As I have told you for all of my broadcast career, whatever the left touches, it ruins. This is the book that illustrates it, certainly for the United States. Just out. America's Cultural Revolution. How tragic that it even is written. How the radical left conquered everything. Christopher Rufo is the writer. The book is up at DennisPrager.com. You begin with Herbert Marcuse. What do you say, the father of everything? So that's an interesting question. Some people think it was Dewey. What was Dewey's first name? Thomas? What was his first name? Yeah?
No.
Not Thomas. What was Dewey's first name? Anyway, it doesn't matter. What matters is, let us say Herbert Marcuse never lived. Do you think things would be different?
That's a really good question. Yes and no. I think that what Marcuse's genius was, to give him some credit, was that he synthesized, conceptualized, and directed trends that were already emerging. And so he was able to harness the student movement of the 1960s. He was able to theorize or rationalize the black radical movements like the Black Panthers and the Black Liberation Army. And then he was able to put it in Hegelian philosophical terms at a very high level, and then guide these young revolutionaries strategically. And a counterfactual history, I don't know. But what I know certainly, looking into his record, is that he had his hand in guiding the strategy of the left that still is the guiding strategy of the left today. Everything from Black Lives Matter movement to Marxist intellectuals within academia, and even corporate diversity training. Something that I go into in the book that's really never been told in before is that his third wife, one of his graduate students that was 40 years his junior, had the idea of taking Marxist ideology and translating into corporate racial sensitivity trainings. This was back in the 1970s. And so he had his hand really in so many different ideas. And he was a brilliant scholar, a brilliant mind. But unfortunately, he overestimated the utopian streak of his own thinking that in practice yielded nothing but devastation.
So if he were alive today, would he be basking in glory in his mind, or would he think, wow, what did I wrought?
You know, it's hard to say exactly, but what I came to admire, even though I disagree with Marcuse through the long research that I did on his life and work, I came to admire, at least in his own mind, his sense of intellectual honesty. And he actually, in the 1970s, considered the New Left's gambit for revolution a disaster. And I think that he would be in some ways disgusted with what's happening right now, because he was an old line Marxist who wanted, working class equality. He wanted to have a society beyond class conditions. And I think what he would see today is an utterly fake left, an utterly elitist left that manipulates symbols and manipulates language to secure their own benefit, their own status in our elite institutions, and has nothing to offer the working class or the underclass, that he would say. And so I think that he would be a radical leftist, certainly, but he would also be a radical critic of where the left has gone, that I think is so bankrupt, it's so fraudulent. I think even someone like Marcuse would recognize.
So your last chapter is titled "The Counter-Revolution to Come." Is that an optimistic statement?
That is an optimistic statement. And, the reason that I'm making it and the reason why I'm framing the solution in those terms is because if you really believe that America has gone through and is going through a cultural revolution, something that threatens to subvert the very basic principles and structures of our society, of the Constitution, of our system of rights and private property and individual freedoms, you can't merely solve that problem with some corporate tax cuts. You actually have to go to the root of it. And the revolution can only be defeated in a sense by something that takes it seriously and uses equal or greater measures. And I think that's counter-revolution. And this is something that has been kind of around the edges of our discourse since Nixon's administration, specifically his second term. And I think it still offers a valuable concept and frame because, look, if conservatives want to have a country that is recognizable and consonant with the principles of our founding, we have to take drastic action in order to make sure our institutions are reformed in that direction. And so I think it requires an intellectual counter-revolution, an institutional counter-revolution, and a cultural counter-revolution that I outline in at least the basic terms in the final chapter of the book.
Where do you see this growing from? Parents disgusted with their schools? Where is our Herbert Marcuse movement?
Yeah, I think it comes from the middle class and works outward. What we saw with the reaction against critical race theory in schools, all of those parents protesting and organizing, getting together, mobilizing the narrative, having this intellectual debate, and then turning it into public policy through legislation in now 22 states is the perfect formula that is really just the prototype for this larger movement. But what it really means fundamentally is re-engaging the democratic structures that have been given to us by our ancestors, by our forebears. We need to make legislation meaningful again. So state legislators need to say, hey, wait a minute, we set the rules of the game. We set the values for our institutions. We determine the personnel within our schools and universities and state bureaucracies. And we want to make sure that the state is not at war with the values of the citizens, but actually affirming and advancing the values of the citizens. And that's going to require the state to be conscious of itself, to get out of this posture, the Reaganite posture that, well, all we need to do is get rid of the government and then everything will be fine. I think that's right in theory, but in practice, right now, America has a larger public sector as a percentage of GDP than communist China does at the current moment. And so we need to not only fight to reduce the size of government, but also be honest to ourselves that the state that we do have must be governed according to a set of values. And in the states where we have a Democratic majority, those values should be ours.
It's a pretty tough battle for obvious reasons, but I'll give you the most recent one. So the court says that the President of the United States cannot unilaterally say hundreds of billions of dollars in debt held by citizens, namely student debt, do not have to be paid. And now he has announced he's simply ignoring it and they don't have to be paid. Do you have any comments on that? Is that feasible? Can he do that?
I hope not. And I think that there's got to be a way to stop that, because if you can act unilaterally in that way, you are obliterating the basic balance of power and the competing interests of our Constitution.
I want to hear more on that. America's Cultural Revolution, Christopher Rufo, up at my website. Christopher Rufo is a gift to this country, and his book coming out tomorrow is America's Cultural Revolution: How the Radical Left Conquered Everything. I just learned, Christopher, I know you know, I'm sure you know, but I just learned it's #1 on Amazon. And I'm thrilled about that, obviously. But I have a mixed reaction. I have said for years now, whatever happens to America and the West, no one will ever be able to say that there weren't major voices diagnosing the problem brilliantly. And you're one of them. So why aren't we making more progress in undoing this damage?
Well, I mean, certainly I'm always an advocate for more progress, but I think that if you look at things within the country itself, there are some really hopeful signs. I think Republican politicians, conservative politicians are starting to change how they think about these cultural issues. They're looking at substantive ways to start recapturing institutions. As part of my work on reforms in Florida, for example, I was appointed with another group of trustees to the board of a Florida public university called New College. We took it over. We replaced the leadership. We're bringing in more mission-aligned and classical liberal-friendly faculty. We're recruiting new students, giving conservative parents in Florida a place to send their kids within the public university system. And then you see this classical K through 12 movement. It's the fastest growing segment of the K through 12 world. It's going back to the foundations of the West, the Greco-Roman culture, the culture of the Bible, the culture of the American founders, all of those great principles and ideas. This is something that parents are demanding, and all of a sudden they're really seeing fruitfully multiply. And then you're also witnessing the emergence of a conservative counterculture in media, arts, entertainment, faith, etc. All of these other domains, conservative aesthetics that are starting to be attractive to people. And so I think you're seeing the beginnings of a movement for revitalizing the culture, for retaking the institutions, and for having a vision of politics that's based on those eternal principles that people are sensing have been degraded and almost destroyed. But I'm an optimist. I have 3 kids. There's no other thing I can do but be optimistic about it and get up every day and fight for it. And I think that if we can have the courage to lead, there are so many people in this country who would follow. That's why I wrote the book. I want to give everyday Americans who are troubled by what they see around them a guidebook for how we got here, a guidebook for understanding the language and the political moment we're living in, and then also the inspiration and the knowledge they'll need in order to move forward.
Well, I think that's true. America's Cultural Revolution is the book. People are leaving San Francisco. They're leaving Portland. Are they leaving Seattle?
Seattle's a little bit different, actually. Seattle has, I believe, still a slight population growth. But I think the population in Seattle is recomposing, meaning that people who are maybe more in the center are tending to flee. They're going to the suburbs. But it's still having enough draw for young people, for tech workers, for more affluent singles that are drawn to kind of, apartment housing and 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom places. So they've been able to, in a sense, stabilize at the population level. But at the downtown level, at the business level, it's still kind of a disaster. It hasn't recovered. And, I go up to Seattle. I left 3 years ago, but I still go up there sometimes. And I mean, it's a wasteland. It's really tragic what happened. I had a friend that visited 5 years ago, or actually now probably 8 years ago. And he said, wow, Seattle's one of the cleanest big cities in America. It's beautiful. He came back not too long ago and said, it looks like somebody dropped a bomb on the city. It's an absolute disaster. And that's simply just a failure of policy.
No kidding. Well, listen, I wish you the best. I'm delighted you came on. We have a PragerU video with you, at least one. How many do we have? One?
I think we have 2, yeah.
2? Great. Anyway, congratulations on the book success. I would even go further. Congratulations to America on the book success. Thanks for being with me, Christopher Rufo.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Dennis Prager here. Third hour of the show. Third hour of my shows for the last week. I've had Julie Hartman on. We do the Dennis and Julie podcast, which I highly commend to your attention, and especially if there are young people in your lives, since Julie qualifies as young. By the way, that's an interesting question. Till when is one young? I'm not kidding. 30?
I think so.
Yeah, 30 is a very big deal for most people.
I dread turning 30.
I know that. When I turned 30, I'll never forget, my friends had a cake made in the shape of a tomb.
Oh, no.
Yeah, tombstone.
Well, that's pretty sinister.
It was. Oh, right after this show, the new episode of Dennis and Julie about struggling with God.
Oh, that was a really good one. We filmed that
that
last
was
week.
powerful.
Airs at 1 o'clock on Julie Hartman YouTube channel.
1 o'clock Eastern time, 1 o'clock
Pacific.
so 4 o'clock Eastern. Yeah, okay. So I have some thoughts here to open up the third hour. My friends, to give you an idea of the intellectual and moral level of the CDC, which is a tragedy because people have trusted it. I did until a few years ago. To say that the last few years have affected my view of American institutions is like saying it is cold in Greenland. Listen to this from the CDC website. It has a heading, people who are breastfeeding. They no longer say women or mothers. People. That's the CDC.
They also say birthing people.
Do they say it?
Yeah, I've read.
The CDC?
Yes, birthing people. Instead of
CDC
mothers.
recommends that people who are breastfeeding get vaccinated and stay up to date. So I have a question about that very sentence for those of you listening. The CDC recommends that people who are breastfeeding. So any group that says people who are breastfeeding is obviously far more political than scientific. People don't breastfeed, women do. So then when it says in the rest of the sentence they should get vaccinated and stay up to date with their COVID-19 vaccines, doesn't part one of the sentence negate part two? Well, why will I listen to the advice of people who say people breastfeed, not women?
It's a great point. You're right.
Right?
It diminishes their credibility. Not just diminishes, it wipes out their
yes,
credibility.
Yes. So I always ask you this constant question that I raise. How does it affect you when you have little trust in major institutions? Like Harvard, where you graduated from?
Thank you.
That was you taught me that from. Lori Lightfoot is a professor now at Harvard. So the CDC says people who are breastfeeding. The AMA says you shouldn't list the sex of a child on a birth certificate. They'll choose it later. What do you trust now?
Well, it's sad. Growing up, I thought that the FBI, and I was going to say the IRS, but I probably didn't know what the IRS was when I was younger. But major institutions, the CDC, I thought that they were the epitome of trustworthy. And now I don't, for obvious reasons. And it's a very unsettling thing because we need to be able to rely on our institutions and trust that they're going to protect us and they're going to lead us right. And it's sad because people who say trust the science, if they are allowing major institutions like the CDC to become so woke, they are creating an environment where people don't trust the science, where people won't be as inclined to seek out professional opinions from doctors or experts, and they may be more inclined to go down a scientific path. They are pushing us in the very direction that they don't want us, or they claim they don't want us to go in.
That's right. Well, I wanted. I should put this up at my website. I mean, people have to see this to believe it. Let me see when when is this dated. So this is from October of 2022. COVID-19 vaccines while pregnant or breastfeeding, and it just came to my attention this weekend. Oh yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. Here, the top heading is people who are pregnant. Mm-hmm. People who are pregnant. Oh my! I could cry. Oh my God! People who are pregnant. The CDC. So tell that next time you are told by a friend, well, the CDC recommends getting boosted and getting the vax, of course, to begin with. Say, you know that the CDC does not believe that only women get pregnant. They won't say pregnant women on their website anymore. They won't say women breastfeed. They'll say people who breastfeed. Why would I take them seriously? I want to know what the average American would answer their, proverbial brother-in-law who said, "You're telling me that the CDC recommends the COVID vaccine and boosters? So here, let me tell you about the CDC." What do you think the average person would, who was pro-vaccine, would say to their brother-in-law?
I think a good 40 to 50% of this country would say, well, they're right. That not all, it's not just women that give birth.
You think it's that high?
Yes, I do. Now, I don't know if most of them would actually believe what they were saying, but they would dutifully repeat the narrative that has been fed to them.
If I went to the kids you graduated with from Harvard, or Harvard from, or from graduated, or graduated from, what do you think? And obviously, it's just a subjective take, I understand. You think half your class would say people breastfeed, not women?
I would say 40%.
You would? Mm-hmm. And you're not sure they believe it? You believe that they believe they need to say it?
Yes. It's like when...
So do they know that they're saying something they don't believe? Or what were you going to say? It's like what?
I was going to say, when I would encounter people who would get outraged by things that were really small, I would ask them, are you really outraged? Or do you think that you ought to be outraged? Or do you think that other people expect you to be outraged? I think it's a similar thing with this men give birth narrative. I don't know if you hooked them up to a lie detector test or gave them 100% effective truth serum that they would really believe that. But I think they would feel that they need to dutifully repeat the lie to keep their standing.
Is there such a thing as truth serum?
I wish there were. But here's the thing, Dennis. They have to repeat that to keep their standing in the American elite. They will not say something, even if they believe it to be false, that threatens their personal or professional advantage. Now, I'm not saying everyone at Harvard or every, person in the who counts themselves as a liberal is this way, but I would say the vast majority are.
Well, we're in trouble, to say the least. Well, I wanted to bring that to people's attention. There's a related thing talking about, let me see if I could find it quickly. Let's see. Yeah, listen to this. I reported this last week. Mayo Clinic threatens to fire professor for comments on COVID treatment and on men and women in sports. The Mayo Clinic has several hundred active projects funded by the National Institutes of Health across 3 locations, but the premier U.S. hospital now appears concerned about a professor's comments potentially closing that federal spigot. Because the man said that men should not race against women. Somebody called it the Mao Clinic, M-A-O. I mean, when you think about the CDC and the Mayo Clinic going woke over science, it is troubling, to say the least. Got another one for you. Here's a big subject. This is one of those untouchable subjects. But I feel that if I didn't discuss it, I would be prostituting myself for convenience. So I'm going to tell you about something that happened in Uganda that I would say 98% of my listeners do not know about. It just happened. And the larger issues that it raises. Back in a moment with Julie Hartman. I'm Dennis Prager. So I have a very sensitive issue that people don't want to talk about. We all know why. I'll tell you why, and then I'll tell you what it is. It's this, for the same reason that the Los Angeles Dodgers could honor a group mocking nuns, but would never even consider remotely honoring a group that mocked Muslims. And I don't want a group that mocks Muslims. It's not my point at all. I'm just saying you can do anything you want vis-a-vis Christians and Christianity, and nothing with regard to Islam. You could have a crucifix in a jar of urine as a major artwork, but you could never put a religious thing of representing Islam, and you should, by the way, I want to make that clear, in a jar of urine. So that's by way of answering the question, why is what I'm about to say not spoken about? Because people fear talking about it. So I'll give the usual preface, and it's a sincerely meant preface. There are many, many millions of good and fine Muslims. It goes without saying. But within the world's religions today, there is more violence coming from Muslims than from any other religious group. And nobody wants to talk about it because they're afraid to talk about it, because most people are cowards. It's just the way the human race is. So what struck not my fancy, but what struck my interest was this from 3 weeks ago. Wall Street Journal: Uganda school massacre signals Islamic State's growing reach in Africa. More than half of Lubriha secondary school students are dead. More than half the students of a school were murdered last month by 37 of its 63 students between the ages of 12 and 22 are dead, as are 5 adult community members. So I'll read to you a little more. See, this is covered, but nobody talks about it. Ugandan officials say the fighters had crossed over from Congo 2 days earlier. Zephana Kiriluhundi, hired last month as the school security guard, was the fighters' first victim, killed with a bullet through the head. Alarmed by the gunshots, dozens of boys — you have to understand, Uganda is a Christian country. And Nigeria, which is half Muslim and half Christian, is massive massacres of Christians by Muslims. Alarmed by the gunshots, dozens of boys locked the doors of their dormitory, but the men shot through the windows and lunged petrol bombs inside, setting ablaze mattresses and other flammable belongings. As the boys' dormitory burned, killing at least 17 of them. How's that for a death? The fighters chased after a group of girls trying to flee. The men hacked to death 17-year-old Amina Beira, who played on the school's netball team, 3 cousins, Marian Ithungu, 22, Junior Mbambu, 20, and Godezio Beira, and 16 of their classmates. Mbambu, in her final year of school, dreamed of studying to become a lawyer, according to her mother, Augustine Biahali. So the other, just to give you another example here, this is from Christianity Today, from same time, 2 weeks ago. Hundreds of Nigerian Christians killed in recent attacks. That's in Nigeria. At least 450 Christians have died in a series of attacks on Christian villages in 3 north-central Nigerian states since May. So that means in 1 month. 450 Christians killed in 1 month. How many Americans know this?
3.
Yeah, the ones sitting in this room.
The ones in this room, yes. Well, certainly there's Muslim terror against Christians, but we don't even talk about the terror that Muslims commit against their own people. Look at the sectarian civil war that erupted in Iraq. You know, just about 10 years ago. There have been various sectarian civil wars, most recently in Syria. How about the young woman, the 22-year-old Kurdish woman, Mahsa Amini, who was killed, beaten to death by the morality police in Iran because a sliver of hair was poking through her hijab? How many Americans know that? We would not be talking about this concocted Islamophobia if we, like many European countries like Denmark, had Muslim immigrants coming in. Not all, of course, are bad. Of course, not all are terrorists, but many come in and commit crime and inflict terrible suffering on the population. We would not be so averse to acknowledging that fact if it were affecting us.
Good point. So I have Muslim listeners. I would love to hear from them.
Yes, Colin.
Do you think, A, it is wrong for an American, let's say, talk show host to bring this up? B, do you think there is an issue that afflicts Islam? Look, a lot of people acknowledge there was an issue afflicting the Catholic Church with regard to child abuse by priests. Nobody denied it. It's like one of the, it's a world scandal, tragically. And of course, everyone knows the majority of priests never did anything like that.
Right.
But it's nevertheless a terrible thing. And this is very, very upsetting. A, that nobody talks about it. B, that it is occurring. And what about Islamic State and just the taking of people and beheading them? Remember the Egyptian workers who were just knelt by the Mediterranean? And was it in Libya or no, Egyptian. It was the Egyptians, yeah.
And obviously the people who suffer the most from radical Islamic terror are Muslims who are living under this regime. Just as you've said on your show, no one hates bad cops more than good cops. No one hates militant Muslims more than non-militant Muslims, who are the vast majority.
So why do they exist? Is there something within Islam that allows for it? It's not happening in Christianity. It's not happening in Judaism. It's not happening in Hinduism. We'll be back in a moment. So we saw these beheadings with Islamic State. And of course, we saw 9/11. And now this massacre of Christians in Uganda a couple of weeks ago, 450 Christians massacred in Nigeria in just the last month. And I don't know why it is unfair to ask, what is it with at least subsegments of Islam? I mean, look at the Iranian regime. I mean, the Iranian regime is totalitarian religious. You mentioned the murder of the young woman, Mahsa Amini, and that which started a massive outcry of anti-government agitation in Iran. Her death. I mean, do we have an example of a religious totalitarian regime outside of Islam? Not that I know of. So these are honorable and honest questions asked. I partook, Julie, you'll find this fascinating. I actually partook of a conference. I wonder if it's on YouTube. I have to check it out. And I was on with the head of the Muslim Public Affairs Committee, one of the biggest Muslim activist organizations in America, to his credit, by the way. The question was, does Islam need to be reformed? And I argued yes, and he argued no. And I said everything I'm saying now in front of him and a fair number of Muslim students. And nobody was offended. In fact, we went to lunch afterwards. These are not anti-anybody questions. But if we don't ask them, it's because people, I think, are just afraid of Muslims.
Well, it goes back to what we were saying in the last segment or the segment before. There's a contrived, I believe, outrage. You're right that these are totally honest questions to ask, and we ask them of everything in life. We question the Biden administration. Of course it's different, but we are not afraid to go to the realm of the uncomfortable in any topic. So why should we be afraid to go to the realm of the uncomfortable with Islam? You ended the last segment by asking, why is this happening? I did 2 episodes on my show Timeless, which I'm sorry, shameless plug, but I'm so proud of these episodes. They're called Islam 101 and Islam 101 Part 2, because a quarter of the world is Muslim. We ought to understand the history and the tenets of the religion. First, there are some things within Islam that do condone violence. It's not a PC thing to say, but it's true. There are hadiths, for instance, which are sayings attributed to the Prophet Muhammad, which talk about the glory of jihad, or fighting in a holy war. I have one here. It says, quote, "He who dies without having taken part in a campaign dies in a kind of unbelief." We can't not acknowledge those just because they're unpopular. Does that mean that the entirety of the Quran or the entirety of Muslim teachings condones and legitimizes violence? Of course not. But we can't ignore that there are hadiths and there are sayings in the Quran which do. And the second reason, if I may, why I think radical Islamic terror has proliferated over the past really 2 to 3 decades, and this is, of course, not my condoning it, of course, but it's providing an explanation. Muslims view themselves as having lost a lot of power in the world over the past century. In 1919, the Ottoman Empire collapsed. In 1948, the State of Israel was founded. That's called, as you know, Nakba, the catastrophe. There have been wars that the United States has partaken in the Middle East, of course, Iraq and Afghanistan, which have been hugely humiliating to the Muslim world. So again, certainly not condoning it, but I think a lot of this terror is trying to reclaim some of the lost power and fight back against the perceived humiliation.
Just to add, I think that's absolutely accurate. But, of course, when they had power, it wasn't that much different.
It was better, though. I mean, if you look at the 17th and 18th centuries in the Ottoman Empire, they were actually quite tolerant to Jews and Christians. So that is interesting,
because I was just going to mention it's the Ottoman Empire that slaughtered the Armenians.
True. That is true. Well, yes. It was in World War II.
World War One.
Yes, you're right, World War I. But for centuries in the Ottoman Empire, they were actually quite tolerant to monotheistic minorities, Christians and Jews, not polytheistic minorities.
They certainly weren't to the Hindus.
Yes.
There was a mass killing. 1-8-Prager-776. You're listening to the Dennis Prager Show. I will cite the greatest Muslim writer ever, since Muhammad anyway, when we come back.
Oh, you stay by my side, you kept on the lights.
Hi, everybody. Dennis Prager here. Julie Harvey with me. Third hour is now regularly. I was going to mention, I'm talking about the massacre of Christians happening in Africa, and nobody cares. By nobody, I don't mean it literally. Some people care. Very, very few. Let's put it this way. If a group of Christians massacred Muslims, it would be the dominant item in the news. When Israel responds to thousands of rockets sent over to kill as many Jews in Israel as possible, Israel is condemned for responding. But nobody says a word in the world organizations about the massacres of Christians by Muslims. Akron, Ohio, and Gina, hello.
Hi, Dennis. Thanks for taking my call. I just want to respond by, how horrified I am, at these revelations of these incidents springing up all over the world, not just only in Africa, but all over the world. And let you know, as a lifelong Catholic, we are not hearing about these incidences in church at all from our bishops, from our priests. And I can tell you, we are not hearing a peep out of the Pope. We're not hearing it about what's going on with Catholics here saying the rosary and participating in some Latin masses, which for most people who aren't Catholic, that does not happen. It's usually a special occasion for a Latin mass. We are being labeled as extremists, and here we are around the world, and a Pope that has a pulpit that could speak to the world, and we don't hear a thing.
Well, thank you. I have something to add to that. Well, I have two things to add. One is something I say to all religious groups. It's a painful, funny line. I don't care what religion you're a member of, as long as you're embarrassed by it.
I don't think I've ever heard you say that.
Isn't it a good line? I actually got it from a rabbi who used to say this just within Judaism. I don't care what denomination you're a member of as long as you're ashamed of it. So I've adopted it for religion. So here's one for you Catholics to really to blow your mind. I don't know where I came across this. This was not widely reported. It just happened 2 weeks ago. This is from ArtNet News, whatever that is. But it's not just ArtNet News. Pope Francis welcomes artists, including Andres Serrano of Piss Christ fame, in a ceremony celebrating the Vatican's art collection. So it is quite remarkable. Listen to this. Among the artists present was Andres Serrano, whose 1987 photo, Immersion, or Piss Christ, showing a small plastic crucifix immersed in urine, caused outrage among American politicians like U.S. Senators Alphonse D'Amato and Jesse Helms, and led to funding cuts to the National Endowment of the Arts, which had supported its production. Listen, this is the line, though. Oh, so this is even in the New York Times. I was surprised to be invited.
Wow.
You can't make this stuff up. I was surprised to be invited, and even more surprised that he gave me a thumbs up. Serrano told the New York Times.
No, the Pope gave him a thumbs up?
Yeah.
Are you kidding?
So it's what the guy said to the New York Times.
Oh, my God. Oh, that is sick.
The Pope also gave the artist a very particular sign of encouragement. It was a great mischievous smile, Serrano told the Times. I don't get it. I really don't. I mean, he claims to be a Christian artist, but it's a very odd way of showing your Christianity.
Do you think that Serrano was making that up about the Pope in order to?
No, I don't. Why was he invited? No. Look, others can certainly validate that this is what happened. That he was he was spoken to by the Pope. He was specifically addressed. I mean, I think it would be clear if he made that up. Okay, let's see here. Valley in Dallas. Hello.
Hello, sir. Mr. Prager, how are you doing? Thank you
Okay.
for taking my call.
Thank you for calling.
You just made a couple of statements talking about two groups who are committing most of the violence, the ISIS and the Al-Shabaab group in Africa. And you basically, from what I heard, put the whole religion of Islam on trial. If these two groups were doing any good work for Islam, you would have some Muslim country voicing support with these groups. As best I can recall, I've never seen any Muslim group or any Muslim country support these two groups. So you have to ask yourself, Are these people doing the work of Islam, or are these just some radicals who just are out to do something bad in the name of religion? So
okay, I'm glad you called. So number one, it's not just two groups. Boko Haram is the biggest massacrer of Christians in West Africa, and I didn't even mention them. Islamic State.
Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram. I agree with you.
Okay, all right. So. Why is it? Tell me, and I that's why I took your call, because I wanted a dialogue. I assume you're Muslim, and I appreciate your listening and calling.
As a matter of fact, I'm sitting in the parking lot of my mosque.
Perfect. Okay, good.
Prayer has started 5 minutes ago, so I'm here for my Zohar afternoon prayers, but I thought it was important.
Yes, it was important. That's why I took your call. Thank you. So tell me this. Is it unfair for me to ask, why is this happening within Islam? I mean, there's an entire regime that is like this, that of Iran. Now, that's Shiite. You're probably Sunni. Nevertheless, So, nevertheless, tell me why is the question unfair?
Because it's not true. For one thing, you talk about Muslims killing people, and I'm sure you've seen recently that in the 25-year anniversary of the massacre that the Serbs did against Muslims and Muslim men and Muslim boys 25 years ago in Serbia.
Right, so hold on with me. I don't want to let you go. Dennis Prager here. Thanks for listening to the Daily Dennis Prager Podcast. To hear the entire 3 hours of my radio show, commercial-free, every single day, become a member of Pragertopia. You'll also get access to 15 years' worth of archives, as well as the daily show prep. Subscribe at pragertopia.com.